Good evening. My name is RJ McGill. I am the head of communications here at the American Academy and the editor of our Berlin Journal. On behalf of the American Academy, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's John W. Kluge lecture entitled Gender, Genre, and Pathetic Literature, a reading which we have immediately entered into a contest for the best lecture title of the semester. I'm going to say a few words about the Kluge visitorship and about Eileen Myles, and then hand the floor over. The John W. Kluge Distinguished Visitorship honors the legacy of the late John Werner Kluge, a German-American entrepreneur, media mogul, and a founding benefactor of the American Academy. Born in Chemnitz, Kluge immigrated to Detroit with his mother and German-American stepfather in 1922 at the age of 8. He eventually enrolled at Wayne State University and then transferred to Columbia because they granted him a full scholarship, which was his opening to the world. Kluge then served in U.S. military intelligence during the Second World War and then entered the television industry, eventually starting Metro Media, a conglomerate of TV and radio stations and the nation's first major independent broadcasting entity, which he eventually sold to 20th Century Fox, which made him very wealthy. In 1987, Forbes ranked Kluge the richest person in America, a title he lost a few years later to an upstart computer guy named Bill Gates. As a philanthropist, Kluge established a center in his name at the Library of Congress, where junior and postdoctoral fellows are in residence to make use of the library's vast collections. The center's $1 million annual Kluge Prize honors lifetime intellectual achievement in the humanities with awardees such as Jürgen Habermas, Charles Taylor, and Drew Gilpin Faust. Kluge's unprecedented contributions to his alma mater, Columbia, some $500 million, are steered primarily towards undergraduates from underprivileged backgrounds, reflecting his own challenges as a young German immigrant. And so in this spirit of German Americanness, the John W. Kluge Distinguished Visitorship brings to Berlin outstanding U.S. scholars and practitioners from diverse fields whose erudition and presence are particularly beneficial to galvanizing our transatlantic ties. It is made possible through a generous endowment from the John W. Kluge Foundation, for which we are extremely grateful, not least because it has brought us Eileen Myles tonight. And a few words about Eileen. Eileen Myles is a poet, novelist, and an art journalist, and the author of 20 volumes of poetry and fiction, including Not Me, Chelsea Girls, Cool for You, and Skies. And on April 18th, as we just discussed, the book A Working Life will be released. Congratulations. More recently, Myles edited Pathetic Literature, an energetic collection of works ranging from poetry and drama and prose, all of which explore those so-called pathetic or sensitive feelings around which lives are built and revolutions are incited. Myles has given readings, lectured, and presented works at countless festivals, colleges, galleries, museums, and bookstores throughout North and South America, Europe, Iceland, Australia, and New Zealand, and many other places, all over the world, basically. Myles' writing and photography have been featured in publications including The Atlantic, The New York Times, The Nation, and the Poetry Project newsletter, among many others. And just this weekend, I was happy to stumble upon the poem Put My House, smack in the middle of the March 6th issue of The New Yorker. And I quote, I asked if it was okay to read a little bit. Put my house inside the boat. Can we do that? Put my dog inside of your dog. Put these birds inside of yours. Put my ocean, put your ocean, all over my mountains. It goes on for 45 more stanzas and is brilliant. Myles has also written catalog essays on the artists Nan Golden, Carolee Schneemann, Nicole Eisenman, and Donald Judd, among others. For this work, Myles has received a Guggenheim, a Creative Capital Arts Writers Grant, 3 Lambda Book Awards, and a Pioneer Lifetime Achievement Award. This was followed by a 2019 Poetry Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and in 2020, the Bill Whitehead Award for Lifetime Achievement from the Publishing Triangle. Dear Eileen, we are honored to have you here tonight, and we look forward to hearing more about your energetic take on the shifting aesthetics of contemporary writing and image making. But before I hand over the podium, a few words about the structure of the evening. For those of you who have been here many times, this is our mantra. Eileen's talk will last for about 40 minutes, followed by a Q&A. If you are with us at the Academy, please just raise your hand. A microphone will come around to you, and you can ask a question. If you are joining us via Zoom, please type your question into the Q&A part of the Zoom platform. don't raise your hand or use the chat. We won't see it. We apologize in advance if we can't answer all your questions. And with that, Eileen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you guys for being here. This is awesome. And I think with the Academy means in the room, right? Like people shouldn't feel like they can't take the mic later on if they're not with the Academy, I think. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about this pathetic book and what the pathetic means, and then I am gonna cut to the chase and read some poems, and I'm going to do it in a swift and beautiful way, I believe. Yeah, I feel I got off a plane yesterday, so I feel a little bit like I'm parachuting into here. So I thought, wear a suit. So I've been interested. Here is, in fact, there is a book called Pathetic Literature, and there's many great things about it, but one is the cover by Nicole Eisenman, which is pretty awesome, and it has a figure on the front, and they're holding a cat, and the cat has their claws up. And for me, I guess it seemed like a symbol of the pathetic, because there's a famous photograph that I bet all of you know in some way, which was during the 60s. There was, soldiers with guns, and then there was sort of a hippie chick coming forward with a flower that she was offering them, and it just seemed like the epitome of the 60s. So I just think there's something about a cat with its claws out being extended that seems like our moment somehow, or sort of how I want it to feel, at best. So I have been interested in this idea of the pathetic since the 90s, when Liz Coates, an art critic, told me about something called pathetic masculinity, which was a thing in the art world that I think Ralph Rugoff wrote. He curated a show, and he called all the artists in there, and it was Mike Kelly, it was Tony Ausler, it was Paul McCarthy, and it was basically guys doing soft stuff, like kind of stuffed animals, and making in the garage, making birdhouses and handwriting and just kind of diaristic and stuff. And what Liz said that was so brilliant and interesting, she goes, it's like they're doing feminism, And I was like, oh my God. And we felt that this new thing, this revolutionary thing that male artists were doing had something to do with gender. And that became very interesting to me and to both of us. And I followed the success of their movement. And I did wonder too, I thought, well, what does this mean for literature? And what is pathetic literature? And it struck me that it was pretty much everything that I loved and everybody whose work I liked. And I was teaching at the University of California at the time. So I did a grad seminar. I was required to teach a grad seminar, and it felt like this sort of ungainly thing to do, which was to teach a seminar called Pathetic Literature. And in it was Samuel Delaney and Valerie Solanas, Robert Walser, Dodie Bellamy. It was a very motley, the crew was motley, which was the deliberate nature of the group, each of them being kind of a writer who in their own way skewed the category of literature, either gender-wise or genre-wise. I mean, everybody felt like a little bit too much or not enough in some way. I mean, Valerie Solanas, you would think, if you know her work, that we would include the Scum Manifesto, but what I say we, it was I edited it, but I didn't feel alone somehow. But what I did include was this great play that she wrote that's completely unpublished called Up Your Ass, because it was what she had 2 copies in the world of this, and she gave it to Warhol, and it's what she wanted Warhol to produce, and he did not, so she shot him. And so it seemed to me that was the more pathetic contribution. Corporate poetry, and then we had, while I was still teaching at San Diego, we had a pathetic conference, and we invited Chris Kraus to be the main speaker, and her I Love Dick at that moment was really an anathema rather than a TV show. So it was great. It was very poorly attended. Nobody knows this conference ever happened. But years later, my editors at Grove said that nudged me to do this book, and I thought, yeah, I mean, I always did think there would be a book called Pathetic Literature. And I said, yeah, let's do it. But there's a way, I mean, I'm sure you all know this. Certainly in New York, there's a way in which you see somebody in the street you haven't seen for a while, and they say, and you talk for a moment, and then you go, "Let's have a cup of coffee." And we all go, "Yeah," and that means I never want to see you again, basically, you know. And so this was that kind of book on my CV, because I thought, yes, I want to do such a book, but when would I ever want to do such a book, you know? And the pandemic was really pathetic. I mean, I think we all know that. Because it was, you know, like I was working on a novel at the time, and my work pattern if I'm working on a long piece of prose is that, like, I'll do a surge of work, and then I know I need to be around other bodies, you know, and then I do a surge of work, but the necessary divider from that kind of attention is other people and other, you know, because I live with a dog, and that wasn't happening, you know? And so I had this kind of incredible blurry feeling, you know, and that I thought, how will I get out of this? And so I suddenly realized that this is the time when I could say, well, what Kafka do I think is really pathetic, you know? And it wound up being just the absolutely perfect occupation for this strange altered time. And it also, and the other thing that was going on was that since the 70s, the actual 70s that I was living in and writing poems in, I've been kind of wanting another 70s again, because it's sort of like it had this kind of lanky, open, extra feeling. And I kept wanting to live in that time, but almost by the nature of becoming like a successful poet, whatever that is, I stopped living in that kind of time. And again, the pandemic yielded that, you know, and so it was an amazing poetry moment. And besides that, I wasn't good for much else except for making selections for pathetic literature. So basically, people were dying, and I was bursting into the present. I mean, that was my feeling of the pandemic. And so I'm gonna read little excerpts from this book, so you'll know a little bit more about what I'm talking about. So this is the beginning. In general, poems are pathetic and diaries are pathetic. Really, literature is pathetic. Ask anyone who doesn't care about literature. They would agree, if they bothered at all. Perhaps the only accomplishment here is I'm saying that as an insider. This book is a kind of hollow. All these pieces of the rock, meaning literature, long and short, are just what I like. The invention of pathetic literature surely is Say Shawnigan's Pillow Book, which I was a book I never wanted to read. I just thought that seems very feminine, you know, and it's just kind of like, I'm not, you know, and a young poet who I had written a recommendation for, and she actually, you know, won something, wanted to do me a favor. So what she gave me is her incredibly dirty, used, loved up copy of the Pillow Book. And of course, I mean, you guys, if you haven't read it, it's astonishing, you know, and it's the most Warholian book, you know, because it's a book of likes and desires and dislikes. So more than 1,000 years ago, she kept her diaries, her interminable and adorable lists, her serenity to herself. But being discovered, because what happened is she got busted. She was a courtesan, you know, and she was writing about everybody and everything. And at some point, somebody found her diary. Being discovered, she admits, kind of ruined things. So in light of our different pace, I'd say we're ready for ruin. Do you feel that cold, beautiful silence? So some of the people who are in here, I think, seem particularly up Ruin's alley. Like for me, Samuel Delany, who is an amazing sci-fi writer and a bit of a pornographer, wrote a really great book called Times Square Red, Times Square Blue. And what it does, it's so great. What he talks about is the ruin of New York in a way, or the lack of ruin of New York, because Times Square Blue describes the kind of moment, the heyday of kind of gay male sex in movie theaters in Times Square and downtown. And slowly that, you know, in the 90s, that was kind of removed. And he was talking, so he talks very graphically, anecdotally about that. And that's the more famous part of Times Square Red, Times Square Blue. But what I used in here was an excerpt from Times Square Red, which is the theoretical part, where he really he makes this distinction that's so beautiful and so important, which is the difference between networks and contact. because networks, again, we heard about networking in the 70s, like at the end of the 60s, they were like, there's this new thing. People get together in groups, not to have parties, but to like meet and share information. It was like, what is that, And it was a pre-computer moment, and now we all know what networks are. But Delaney contrast that to Contact, which to him was very much about going into movie theaters and having sex with people and meeting people and clubs and bushes and and the whole. But it's sort of like, but we all know Contact, the beauty of Contact, which is what happens in the grocery store in the line where you have a very stray conversation, but you have to be there. It's sort of like it's a very bodily kind of thing, and he makes this beautiful theoretical distinction between the two, and it is something that I know with my life and my time and my body. But the other thing that he says incidentally in this book is he just talks in passing about something that Foucault described. I guess he's talking about his own ideas about New York and ruin as a discourse. And he says that Foucault described discourse as an unconscious, which I think I find that to be a really exciting idea, because I always, a discourse seems so kind of specific and hardy and delineated, but for it to be as kind of smoky and, kind of holding us in a whole other way. And I guess what I thought about, what does that, I love it, but what does it mean? And I thought of masculinity as a discourse, of course, right? And what that means is when you're at dinner and when you're at dinner and people think you're a female, there's a way in which the conversation is constantly led by the men. And when a female person at the table tries to say something, everybody goes, huh? And then the conversation returns to the male conversation. Like, that's an example of a discourse. And an example of an unconscious, which I've really been experimenting with, which is incredible. Like, if you're in such a situation, last weekend I was doing a gig at Mount Holyoke College, and the guy who picked me up on at the airport drove me, and we were talking, and then at some point, he's an older guy, and at some point he starts talking about, well, my friend always had this rule for dates, never talk about politics, religion, or money, and I thought, well, what do you talk about? And I just started to tell him he was sexist, and he was just like not hearing that. And then he went on to talk about how much he loves driving. Do you like doing this? And he goes, oh, I love doing it. He says, I love meeting people. I learn all about people. And he talks and talks and talks and talks. And I finally did the thing where I was like, did you notice that if you love meeting people, you haven't asked me one single question about myself? And he went completely quiet, and he waited for a minute, he changed the subject and kept going. And I feel like that is an example of the unconscious and a discourse being one and the same. It was kind of, and really try and do this anytime you find this sort of thing occurring, because nobody will ever, the rule is that it must be denied, and it must be denied in a completely unconscious way. So the first person that I selected for this book was Simone Weil. And again, I'm sure you guys all know her. And obviously the bio is she's a Marxist philosopher. She converted to Catholicism from Judaism. But the reason I wanted to put Simone Weil in here, and I thought, what is pathetic? I mean, part of the nature of this editing process was like bending people to my will, because there is a pathetic somewhere in everybody. You just have to really look for it. But for Simone Weil, she wrote this amazing essay about becoming a Catholic but refusing to be baptized. And she explained it so beautifully. She said that if she didn't get baptized, she would remain with the people outside of the church. And which I thought I feel like exactly that's the world I want. That's the book I want, which is to say that like an anthology is always, it's a big book, but it's always like there's always more people than the book that you want to put in. And so the book in a certain way always exists outside of itself in a kind of a state of overflowing, but also just the kind of the beautiful compassion of deciding to do something or to be something. And then secondarily deciding to be outside of it as a position. So that's what brought her in here. I want to read a couple more excerpts from this, and then I'll see how you feel. Yeah, I've collected whoever's in here for their dedication. What's great about this introduction is it sounds like me, so I can just read it in a very natural manner. I've collected whoever's in here for their dedication to a moment that bends, not in a gay way, but you know how when you're walking towards the horizon, it seemingly dips. And you feel something. That's pathetic. It's an empathetic thing. The light shifts, and biologically, we turn too. People get different. Take the word crepuscular. And just really, crepuscular is such an awful word, right? That's the essence of a poetry word, you know? And shard is another poetry word, but so crepuscular, the blue moment. Some creatures only come out right then. A lot of the world is trained to think of that part of existence as vacation or what happens during drinks. But I'm saying no, I think it feels like a life. As a citizen of the United States, I'm always surprised by where I live and how I live. Looking back on 2003 when George Bush was bombing the hell out of Iraq, and Joe Prue shows us an obituary what that looked like on the ground. I mean, miraculously, this guy, Joe Prue, he was with a group of young activists who went to Baghdad before we started bombing, and Paul Chan was one of them, and they took pictures of people in Baghdad, and then they put the photographs all over New York, so when the bombing began, we could look at the faces of the people who were suffering. It's clear that the destruction of the World Trade Center handed George an opportunity. And now I want to jump to a passage that is really about the word, because if you follow the word pathetic, it's so interesting because in Europe, pathetic continues to mean, in all Europe, it continues to mean something interesting and beautiful. In the United States, it became a term of derision, which is so telling about the United States. Cindy Sheehan's 25-year-old son, U.S. Army Specialist Casey Sheehan, was killed in action in Iraq. And so she met several months later with other military families in Bush, who then pretty much kept bombing and destroying Iraq in the name of freedom. So Cindy Sheehan wanted to talk to him again. She sat at the end of George Bush's street in Crawford, Texas, and waited. They called it Camp Casey. 1,500 people joined her. Sheehan said, if he even starts to say freedom and democracy, I'm going to say bullshit. You tell me the truth. You tell me that my son died for oil. You tell me that my son died to make your friends rich. You tell me that. You don't tell me my son died for freedom and democracy. She also vowed not to pay her federal income tax for 2004. I mentioned Cindy Sheehan because I recall a conservative commentator called her that pathetic woman. Her sitting there, her famous act, meant that as a woman, Cindy Sheehan was taking more space than she deserved. And that aspect of pathetic is what I'm truly interested in here. The act of taking a little less or a little more. It's the essence of a political meaning. A pathetic man is chatty, effusive, sort of gay-ish in the high school sense of the word. But what does gay mean other than non-conforming? The space he is taking is a woman's. You can't take the wrong space, a woman's space, and be masculine. And I'm going to hop to another hot. This is an amazing introduction. I think you can flow with this. Looking at death, imagining it. Literature, this scraping sound, is the way we deal with that one unknowable space. I'm afraid of death of my friends who are dying. I was afraid to go see Allen Ginsberg when he was dying. I was welcome. I think he even called me, but I was afraid to be that close to him at the moment, like Allen had to do all the loving. So Rosebud's document, gathering every pointillist detail of Allen's dying, still feeds my sense of loss at not having the courage to walk in. Each shred of story in here is a little machine of feeling that bends like this and that. Charlene, and that's the painter Charlene von Heil, my European friend, smiles at the difference between apathetic and the one embedded in any Romance language. It got ugly here, and here means America, not Germany. It should be our motto. You could say we invented slavery because we made it be our economy. We became modern. We made it everything, and now we don't know where to hide it. In our guns? We bail out banks, but reparations for generations of damage is not a real thing. I know that language changes by use, mostly in the mouth of the underclass, but I wonder if a book can be a new mouth and lips to remake a world's intention on this day in a culture. And this is the last little bit I'm going to read. If you deliberately go through the door the wrong way, many of us at once, I hear a whoosh. This is profound redundancy, meaning we go to literature to describe states of being, of mind, producing sudden and inexplicable feeling. Can a feeling go both ways? Can we both hate and love? I would never argue why anyone needs poetry, but everyone can find a poem that elaborates a model responsible to their own way of thinking, not so much for consolation as confirmation. It bestows on you a gestational feeling, like it birthed you and you feel like you did it. It's your double. What author has not had that feeling when they meet a reader and they smile at you like you are them? Yikes. It is so violating. And yet aesthetics will not protect you. You are not alone when someone thinks they can see your mind. Reading is a collaborative act. It takes away the onceness of the world and it gives it back repeatedly. And language is the loss that repairs. So I'm going to fix you guys in the end of this with some poetry now. And so this is my galley for this new book called A Working Life. And I don't mean working life in terms of labor. I mean it more like a working model, because at some point I realized that I was sort of not so much designing myself in my poems, but somehow bearing myself. And I mean literally like holding time, holding moments, holding, and just, I'm not going to finish that sentence. I'm just going to read a poem. It's something like rectifying my existence, but rectifying is such a shitty word. I don't think I mean that. So I'm going to read the poem that you just read a little smidgen of. During the pandemic, I was involved with somebody who was living in I was living in Texas and they were living in New York and they kept saying, come. And I was like, no. So I was trying. So that's exactly what a poem is good for. I was just like, I kind of wedged this poem in between there to kind of philosophically explain to her why I could not. And we broke up. Put my house inside the boat. Can we do that? Put my dog inside of your dog. Put these birds inside of yours. Put my ocean. Put your ocean all over my mountains. Put my mountains in there. Put my dog in yours. My dog walk is safe inside your dog walk. Let me eat inside you. Let me eat your food. Let me eat your house. Put your house inside my dog. Put your dog on my boat. Naturalize. Put my heart in yours. Put my mouth on your mouth. Put my hair in yours. Let me breathe inside you. Let me smell your guts. Put your boat in my eye. Let me eat your friends. Put these hours inside your hours. Eat this bird, cheap. Eat my dog's foot. Eat that ocean. Run to him or the ocean. Run to them. Hear these birds cheep. Fly to me. Eat my foot. Put my house inside yours. In your mind, think me fly. This fly me home, love me now. Forget your phone, eat my heart. Run to him or the ocean. Tweet, tweet, tweet. Dog growl. Cluck, click. Put my house right in there. Yeah, that's me looking out the window. Look at us. Look at me. Bark, bark, bark. Put your heart inside that bark. Really? I don't know. I heard I don't know about that. I'm not sure. Okay, this poem is called, no, I'm going to read the first poem in the book. A friend of mine was in love, and I tried to say, go for it. And again, there's a lot of failure in this. I mean, my work is obviously pathetic, and I mean that in the best sense. Birds are pathetic, right? And I think I was reading the New Yorker on the plane here, which is the only time I read the New Yorker, right? They pile up. It's like a horrible thing. If you subscribe, you're like, oh. So every time I get on a plane, the point is to dump 2 New Yorkers, And then I'm reading the whole thing. I was like, what is this? I love the New Yorker. But there was an article about birds, and it was so beautiful because they were saying that birds up sing and down sing. It's sort of like the very nature. Because Saidiya Hartman, who is in the pathetic book, said, how is it different from abject? And I was like, how is it? I couldn't answer her. But that is the difference because abject is all down sing, right? And I think pathetic is up sing and down sing, and it's the whole thing. like poetry. So this is for my friend. Yeah, because she didn't get the person, is where I was going. Nothing better for people than dogs. Nothing better than making you scream here. There were 2 super new cars and then some pink chicken fillets. I guess there were berries for sale in Scandinavia. A man in a plaid shirt and cookies. Also, they are working in the cemetery. I can see their blue ladder from here. A man has written a book about many deaths or many things to do after. Read it, they say. But what comes after is a small idea. Now is large, rainy. Amy, I wish you luck. And here's sort of a traveling poem. It's called, I think I'll say it in the Gothenburg, something like, I want to say it correctly. So it's for Daphne and Alice, these 2 women I met there. The long professional life of a water drinker. This is what a lot of us do. Came home and lost tons of consciousness. For a time I stole trays from hotels, and now I steal cups. There was this towel I really wanted. Oh, did I say Norway? It's Sweden. There was this towel I really wanted. Sweden knows towels. There was a shirt at the airport, white, sort of flocked. Mine in every way except for this girth. I bought the girth a burger, and I nearly missed my plane. I ran and my heart pounded. I was not so fast. There was a man running with me. I yelled 36 in camaraderie, but he ignored me, but then he started dropping shit. I've been there. There's so much coffee. There's plenty of coffee. I wish someone was here. I'm becoming so sensitive. A person who has slept 10 hours, I'm like, this is perfect for how I feel at this moment. A person who has slept 10 hours, I'm like Vincent Price in Anything. My soft voice whispering, anything. There was a woman in my poem, my dream, and she looked like someone I dated. She felt like her. Like she was going to be her, and it was an intense time in both of our lives. She was finishing something, and I was making a mountain of sleep. It was possibly crazy, and she was humoring me, but I felt our gap, about to be closed. It must be true. I thought, it feels this way. The 2 someones about to become us. This geological drama. Tons of time manifest like persons. I was slowly heaving myself forward to close the small distance. And I was struck in the dream by the fact she was anyone. And I do this, make her mine, to share my coffee. It is better now. Students. The coffee is good. It has become right for me and the day. And this is the relationship I wanted. The dark liquid waking me up in a stolen cup. It's a little beautiful, right? What are we doing? I'm going to read a couple more, and then you guys can ask interesting and painful questions. But I spent some serious time right after the pandemic in a bout of activism, which I've always, I've felt I'm a political person. I think about politics. I write about politics, but I've never really, and I've gone to demonstrations, but I never really got deeply involved. But the park in New York City, there's a park called East River Park, which was the most beautiful, most vernacular park in New York City. It ran along from Chinatown to 14th Street, and it was just very wild in a way. There was a big amphitheater there where people would have dance parties. You didn't have to rent it. There were barbecues, there's a running track. It's an amazing park and 1,000 trees. And the city of New York, after Hurricane Sandy, decided that they needed to do something to help the neighborhood and help the park. Well, the end of it is they decided the way to save the park was to destroy it and build another park on top of it, meaning a park that looks like every industrial park we have everywhere with, fake grass and skinny little trees, and so they've done half of it already, and it's one of the great tragedies in New York. But for a year and a half, I was part of a cadre of people. It was so amazing and so utopian to be just pushing for something that possibly more than likely you would not win, but the feeling of being against the thing and putting everything into it. And so I put some poems into it, and so this is one of those poems. And it was just real estate. It's always real estate. It wasn't, it was opportunism and real estate. The park. Politicians are like actors, and real estate investment groups are like vampires. Politicians think they have to let bite them or they won't get any work. The rest of us are humans living around the show. Squirrels are squirrels, birds are birds. Our park is a giant stage we thought was real because we walked there every day. It is a set that Robert Moses built so he could run his highway alongside it. My dog knows the story. You know the story. Everyone knows the story. The vampires are building a giant boat on top of our park in order to save it. It will take them about 10 years. The waters will rise. The children will be old. I will be dead. The vampires will be rich. The politicians will have these tiny vials of blood all lined up on their shelves from the years they were in that play. Okay, I have a teeny one, and I need a perfect ending one, and then we're out of here. Oh, I know. Okay, one. This is so perfect. I mean, I know Alex Katz, and I've known him since I was a kid, and he did an amazing. It is an amazing retrospective right now, or I guess it just went down. But there was a show about a year or two ago, and it was just nature, but it was nature. I mean, he's 90. It's like, how does this guy? He's like the only piece of the New York school that is still like fully working, fully, and doing great work. And so it was a show of nature paintings, but it was nature of somebody who's lived for so long that nature is scary and fierce. So that like a tree with like things floating around, you just felt this Zen ferocity. And so I was looking at the show and I thought, what do I do? I was like, I don't write a review. That's just not what I want. So I wrote a poem. So it's a teeny guy for Alex Katz. Because these paintings are both coming and going, finding nature and losing it, I feel silent. But that isn't how you feel. Waiting world, violent friend. And one teeny last poem called Mice. They see a cluster of small rubber ducks and scraps of broken shells and think, I'll shit there. We describe them as brazen when they run through what actually is their home. So I begin to kill them because I'm better than them. One was seen running into the bathroom, my bathroom, and a small, frail one was found dead right on the floor. And the poison is working, and I feel bad because, in fact, I like living with them. They're part of my life. They're little shits everywhere, and I have killed their child. They're unclean, anyone would say. Isn't it why I must kill them? But I'm unclean too. Isn't that why they're here? And I generally have guests who say, this place is so small. They look around and I feel shame. And I look around usually right after a trip or in a couple of days and it's small. But not to them. They think it's huge, perfect. And that is a friend. And why don't I keep them around? Come back. And I know you will. Thanks. Thank you. Oh. I think it just... Okay, feel it.
Which means you have to ask questions.
We can have a big little silence, a little moment where we all kind of... There's a thing called Bhav. Do you ever hear of Bhav? B-H-A-V? Like there's a person called a Bhakti Yogi, and the Bhakti Yogi's thing is to come into a room and they feel the Bhav, which is the quality of the room, and then their job through like chanting and singing and doing is to move the Bhav up and down. It's kind of incredible. So we're just in the Bhav. Does anybody want to shift it? Oh yeah, there you are. Yay. Here comes the mic.
It was great.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask, so I'm a poet also, and then oftentimes at parties, on dates, group settings, people ask me, what do you write
Can people hear this person? I think use the mic a little more. Like,
Hello.
yeah.
Okay.
It feels better too, right?
Thank you. Yeah. I was going to ask, so I'm a poet also, and I'm often asked at parties and dates and group settings, what do I write about? And I always find that a really interesting question because I feel like all poets write about the same thing, which is like mommy issues, daddy issues, childhood trauma, relationship failures, dissatisfaction with life, and those kind of things. But I feel like those are things I don't want to say. So I'm wondering...
Maybe I think you should. I think you should. See
But I'm
what they're
wondering,
made of when you say that, but keep going.
But just how would you answer that kind of question? Because it's very broad, and I can't just say like, like I'm not a scholar, so I can't say like 19th century something. But
Right.
You know,
I don't know. What do I say? People do ask that all the time. What do you write poems about? I was like, oh, anything, everything. Whatever is happening. I mean, like whatever is moving through the screen of my existence. And memories and things I've thought about, and language and the history of poetry, and yeah, I mean, you could just go on and on and on, and they're like, they would walk away eventually, but I think it would be really funny and great because you're saying the thing nobody's supposed to say that thing, Like, I know I started writing poems because I read Sylvia Plath, and my father had died, and Daddy was Daddy is a great poem, but I thought, oh, I get to do this, and that's what I wanted to be a poet for in some ways at the beginning. And then later I got to New York, and people were like, no, we don't do that, And then I learned how we don't do that, and now I do that, but I kind of mix, because it winds up being about language. You grow a shell, and then the shell writes about Daddy or something, But it's got to bleed here and there so that the shell is authentic, I think. But, like the greatest poem in here is a poem by James Schuyler. I almost read it. It's about living in New York with talking about an apartment he had in New York where he saw the UN building and had this beautiful view. And he lived with Frank O'Hara and John Ashbery. And then later he moved and he described having a lover, and the lover betrayed him, and they, and stuff. And then at the end of the poem, he alludes to both Frank and John and the lover, and then he says, but they weren't my lovers, you were. You said so. And it was like that, you said so. It's like 3 beats. It's like one of the most emotional moments in a poem I've ever read, And it's just like, he's writing about heartbreak, but we really know it's also about 1, 2, 3, you said so, and that the poet makes the reader feel like they're having a finger poked into their chest. And that's like an act of genius, but we're all geniuses, I think. Anyway, thank you for asking that. Anybody else? Yes?
Thank you, first of all, for the beautiful
Use the
lecture.
mic.
Thank you, first of all, for the beautiful
thank you.
lecture. Being a translator myself, I'm of course familiar with the problem of the difficulty of the different meanings of the term pathetic. And I of course know that it depends on the context, how you have to translate it. And the same thing with the context that is interesting happened to me when I read the title of one of your books, Afterglow. I came across this word in a completely different context. It didn't have anything to do with dog rides or dog lawyers, but with a certain kind of mushrooms. And yeah.
I don't even know that context. That's amazing.
People do take these mushrooms, and then they have a kind of certain experience. And after this experience is over, they have the so-called afterglow. Just wanted to ask you if you ever heard about that.
No. I love that. That's what you. That is. My answer is no. I have not heard that. But it's so weird. I actually got the title. I was writing. I think. What did I call it? My dog was the title, which was terrible. And then in Provincetown there was a kind of a performance festival after Labor Day, and it was called the Afterglow Festival. And I just had the card over my desk, and I kept thinking, such a great card. I'm just looking, and suddenly I was like, oh my God, that's the title of my book. So it had another context as well. Yeah. I have to say, translators are I think translators are the smartest, most sophisticated people. I've never had a better time than sitting after some event with a table full of translators. They're so smart. They know all of literature, and they know each other. And it's just, they're really cool, remarkable people. I'm so grateful to you. And Odile, my translator, is that you sitting right there? Yes. Yeah. Ooh la la. Is there a hand? And now there is a mic. Does a hand have a mic?
Hi. Thank you
This
for
is
the
a blinding light. I can't see anything.
Thank
It's
you for the
amazing.
talk. There's motion now.
Great, I got it.
Every time, as I'm from Boston, and every time
Boston?
I hear Boston, yes, and every time I hear you read, I'm reminded that you were also from Boston,
Yes.
and I begin to hear your poems, which I don't always when I read them on paper, and I certainly didn't when I first read them on paper, in this unmistakable, wonderful musical Boston accent that's also the language of my family and my cousins, everybody. I'm
Always.
there's
Nobody
the-
ever says that with enthusiasm unless it's like your mind's, yeah.
Yeah,
Go
no,
ahead,
but
keep
we're,
going.
it's we who are from Boston can appreciate the beauty of this, and I'm wondering about your feelings about the relationship between making language, creating language as a poet or as a stylist of prose, and not just. Of course, there's the Grace Paley thing that you write how you talk, or you should, but how do you perceive a relationship between how you create language and how words sound to you, or how words sound when you say them or when you hear them? Mm-hmm. It's maybe an abstract question, but
I'm just really driven and organized by the sound of it. It's very unconscious. But I know that that's what really shapes. My poems are filled with rhymes and similar, like weird little, it's interesting because there's there's metric poetry, there's formal poetry, and then there's like poetry. Certainly in America, like the mid 20th century, they discovered the American language, and realized that there was this, and Williams, a variable countant that we write, and basically a school of poetry that comes off jazz, because jazz is off the page essentially, and it's not traditional Western music. It's improvised, and so I definitely write, but improvised doesn't mean that there's a total mathematical system in there. Not one that I'm like, I'm going to move this, like that. Though I actually find it's fun when I write in a conventional form. But I think that we're all, and part of it too, I'm an ex-Catholic. Catholics are counting all the time. You were like taught to count, every moment, and so I think there's all that going on. But what I write in a Boston accent, and it's so weird. It's sort of like I'll be talking to somebody and then I get up and I'm parking my car, and stuff, because I learned to think and read in a language that sounds like that. There's a wonderful poet from Boston, John Wieners, and he completely, you can when I hear recordings of him, his rhymes are all Boston rhymes, and so it's weird how you don't. Your question was the relationship between sound and because it is. I write poems. They're two things, right? Like I don't make the poems exactly look how I sound. I don't design the page to mime the sound at all, because I think when you're reading visually, it's you're kind of controlling appetite and desire, and it's almost like a film strip, or what used to be a film strip. And so it's sort of like the short lines make the person. I read fast, so the short lines I think make the person digest the poem quickly and turn the pages quickly, and so it's a pace thing, But yeah, I feel like there's something else too. I will just say though, as a writer, I think the most exciting thing is audiobooks. Both making them, because it's sort of like, we dream of there being an audiobook of this, but every novel of mine, mostly there's an audiobook, which means you've written this thing. It's often I am slow, like as I'm writing poems and I'm writing all these different things. So my novels usually take like 10 years. I've had one 5-year novel, but mostly are 10-year novels, So it's like suddenly for 3 days you're in the studio with this person, and you're reading the whole book to them. It's like the ultimate bedtime story. And also you're reading it to yourself. And I think the thing that's so profound about reading is that like there was a moment when you were alone and you wrote a poem. And the thing is, when you come back and read the poem for the first time in front of people, that moment comes crashing forward, but it's socialized. So it's like this very intense. I think that's why those of us who are poets like reading really love it, because you keep reliving this. If you like the poem, it was a really great experience getting it, and capturing that moment. But it's a sonic moment finally, and I think there's a visual record of it. But it's so cool when painters say, we drove cross country and we listened to Afterglow. You just feel like you've become like the soundtrack, so it's beyond being a band. It's something even weirder, Did I answer your question?
Yes.
It's like, I don't know. One other thing is, it has nothing to do with anything but maybe us. What the coolest thing about having a Boston accent is the only other person there's something called the non-rhotic R, which is, it came from England. It's a rustic English accent of the 18th century. And those people went to Boston and Australia. So the only place in the world I ever go where nobody hears my accent is Australia. It's so funny. I just get denuded of, except they hear that I'm American, It's very weird. Yeah. Anyway.
We have a Zoom question. Poetry often seems to tend towards the craving of the reaching for things rather than attaining of things. Heartbreak generally is more exciting than stable love sometimes. Does this resonate with you? How does that experience of the desire of things versus attainment of things come into your poetry?
Well, yeah. I think poetry is absence in this way. Even just to look at how it looks on the page, it's just not complete. It's an incomplete page. It's a there's fewer words, and you just, it's sort of, when you write prose, it just fills goes from the West Coast to the East Coast of the page, and it's this thorough thing. It's this machinic thing, where poetry is this crazy mortal thing. Like, you write, why, and then you wait, and then you're like, and then you go down, I think, the dog. You're like, people are forever stuck with your body in time. It's like really mortal, And so it's just, in a way, it's all about presence and absence and even potential loss, There's nothing hotter than having been at the last poetry reading of a poet. People are like, did you hear Creeley in San Diego? Like they're almost, it's sort of like, and a poet gets more value as they get older, if people like your work, because the thing is going to be gone, and it's just going to be this, and stuff. And so there's something so heroic, I think, about poetry. And so your job is to want. Your job is to stand there and say what you want and not get there, but just to be here in the incredible, like it's devout. It's like this crazy devout state of wanting. It's just like, and I think in a way there is nothing better, because when you get, you're like, and then it's one, it's like, I'm not going to go into my personal relationship life, but there are arcs that are so fantastic to be on, and they're like vistas. Sublimity. That's what sublimity means, right? Standing someplace or being at something where you don't even pick up your phone. You don't even think to pick up your phone or take a picture. You're so transfixed by that present, And I think that's poetry's job. And so I think you're not supposed to get there. You're supposed to be there. It's an art of the present. Is the zooming anything else?
There is another one, if there's no other questions. The
Room versus Zoom. Here we are.
We have multiple. Well, we have multiple coming in. I'm curious about how you might see your notion of pathetic literature in the context of the desperate and unhinged self-publishing so frequently seen on contemporary media. I think that means social media.
I'm not sure I know how to answer. If they were here, I would say, could you say a little more?
The person does say a little more, but it's not a question anymore. It is... The remaining part of the question is, I have a soft spot for the human draw for contact, even if mediated, and like the connection to this thought. It seems extra pathetic in a lovely way.
See, I think they answered their own question. They were talking about this shaggy world of publishing, and yeah, I think that's great. More is better. And I think we as readers and listeners decide what we like. Remember when the internet started and people were like, this is going to be too much, and there is too much. But we all manage to find things we like, and it's really great. And then your relationships with people have to do with people saying, go over here. That's amazing. When you start to have selecting relationships. So yeah, it's pathetic. I think pathetic is the right word for that condition of publishing and poetry writing out there. And yeah, they're right.
Hi.
Hello.
I have one question about, or maybe it's a comment on pathetic. When I first learned this word, it's like some 30 years ago when I was a student at Madison, Wisconsin, and I knew the German word pathetisch, and that's like, I don't know, it's like more up here somewhere, more honorable, more different. But pathetic, that was like, you know, like my fellow students would say, it's pathetic. It was always like spitting out.
Yes.
And so, I don't bring these words even together in the two languages, or at least I wouldn't know one like this kind of honorable German way. So I'm really also thinking that, I was thinking about how one learns language, and it's really by the sound of it and how it was, because I didn't know what pathetic means the way people use it, but I got a sense from context. So that's interesting. The other question I had, because you related it to gender at the beginning, but didn't say so much more about gender afterwards, and I was thinking, since
Buy the
you
book.
Yeah, and I know that I could maybe learn more by reading it. But I was also wondering, because you talked about mice at the end and dogs in between, whether animals can actually also be pathetic, or whether it strikes me as a very human thing, at least the American kind of pathetic.
I think our relationships with the animals are entirely pathetic. You know, I mean, I think that's there's a shameless exchange of pathetic natures. I mean, I think that's why we talked about animals in this way, like, as an animal, or, because it there's such a profound opening and such a profound exchange, and we have shame about that,
So is it us then that are pathetic in relation to
both. It's a pathetic relationship, but see, I'm very earnestly wanting to push this, because the word, in English in the 19th century was closer to the European meaning, and it has evolved. It's almost like as America got meaner, it became like pathetic, because it really, in a way, it's still talking about the same thing. It's something frail, something sensitive, something, like, I don't know how I feel about that. It's sort of, did you watch the Academy Awards? I thought The Whale was a terrible movie, but what's his name, Brendan? When he got up and he made that incredibly pathetic speech, and what was so amazing was to cut to the audience, and they were all like, you know what I mean? They looked so uncomfortable. I mean, the movie was bad, but it was sort of so great that he got up there and said just what he was thinking and feeling, and it was so non-Hollywood, and the room could not bear it, because it's a night of performance and winning, and like, the camera's on me now, and like, and I thought it was such a beautiful, pathetic moment. So my desire really is to push the word. I mean, I don't know if one can decide, because the language really does change by usage, and it's sort of like, but can we push the word pathetic back to the other polarity? It would be, because I think in America, it's so true. We're so, it's so, like, the guns. I mean, there are so many. Can we make a list of the things about America that are so hard and hateful, and, like a culture based in slavery, a culture based in genocide? There's so much angst. It's almost in the dirt of the country, and so it just, it's like if somebody like Donald Trump could be president, it's sort of like, now they're like, and he paid for a prostitute out of his, it's like, we all knew that, and we elected him, it's sort of like, there's something so self-hating, and so, and so I think that pathetic, as it's come to mean, is a self-hating word, because you just don't want to be caught being vulnerable in America, don't you want to win, and I think that's our burden, yeah. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
You probably can't see me. I'm short too. I'm vertically challenged.
There you are.
Vertically challenged. I just wanted to ask you, who are some of your favorite poets today? Who are you really sort of drawn to in terms of the poetry style and their sort of lyrical form?
I have a gang of, there's always new people that I start to read, but I mean, obviously, C.A. Conrad is a really good friend of mine and a poet that I love. I think Simone White is remarkable. I think I continue to love Alice Notley's work. I'm trying to think who I carried a bunch of poetry with me. Who else? Or no, did I leave it? I was like, how many books can you? I mean, those are the people. Ariana Rines, I think is really great. But there are poets living and dying. There's the older poets that we were talking about at dinner. We talked about, George Oppen is an amazing poet, and Gwendolyn Brooks is like a remarkable poet that like is so established that people don't know how great she is. Though I think the greatest thing that her novel Maud Martha is incredible. So yeah, I mean those are some of I mean, the poet I mentioned, John Wiener, is remarkable, is really great. Yeah, I mean, is that enough? I can't. Yeah? I know, I'm going to think of more people. I'll be tonight in bed. I was like, I can't believe I didn't say. Oh.
It's okay. You're not tested.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I have a question that might go back a little bit to the first one. I'm very curious about the relationship between your poems.
Where are you?
I'm here. I can also stand up.
Oh, hi.
Hi. Yeah, so the relationship between your poems and how you sequence them or order them within a collection or then as an editor in an anthology. So I'm just curious how you see the relationship between your poems. Within a body of work, or how do you decide these ones belong together in this collection? Do you decide to leave some out? Do you create connections between different collections through individual poems?
I mean, I guess I always think about the reading experience. Like, ideally, it's not that everybody sits down with a 700-page book and, well, actually, what I was going to say doesn't make any sense. But imagine this was a regular book, a book of poetry. It's like people don't sit down and read the whole damn thing. I mean, unless they're going to write a blurb or they're reviewing it or something, or they're in love with you, or they're like, oh my God. Usually people don't read straight through. But I like to design the book as if they would, so it's sort of like in a way I'm always organizing for a sort of ideal read that may or may not happen, most likely doesn't happen. But I think moment by moment, I mean, I think that for me, the experience of being a poet is reading, and so before I ever published poems anywhere, I gave readings, and people said things like, I remember an older poet said, start in with comedy and go out with beauty. Like it's sort of like, because it's always, the bob in the room is weird. You get up and you're like, ooh, and you're like, I'm reading the wrong poems and I'm doing the wrong thing, and you're prepared, And so it's like, if you read something that's sort of funny and just goes right into that space, wow. I can do it. Well, thank you. That could be the end, perhaps. Yeah. It's sort of like, if you break it up right away, then you have more freedom. It feels open, and then you can follow it with something else. But I think, so it's a bit like a yoga class, the reading, because it's like you do something funny, and now you can go to something like historic or narrative, or you can tell, what I mean, like, and then with that you feel kind of like, okay, and now you're going to go for feeling, and I just feel like it really is like, it's almost like the afterglow of each poem is what you're organizing around. Like, you read something, you kind of guess how it feels, and then how do you enter that space? So I think it's very song-like. You're really trying to keep moving the thing along and surprising it a little bit too. And so I think for me, I imitate that when I put a book together. Like, I try and keep creating different shaped experiences so the person will be, the downward dog follows the whatever, and it's like you keep being stretched and moved and rewarded if you keep going. So.
Getting back to the word pathetic.
Okay.
We've lost it in our language for now. That's an effort you're making. There are words that no longer mean what they used to mean in the way people use them, like the word enormity. There isn't, as a great badness, as opposed to just a bigness. I feel like that word is kind of gone. And I was just...
Is that your word? Is that the word?
That's a word that bothers me that people misuse. But, in any case, the thing is that, so given that we can't use pathetic, stipulating that word has been damaged for now or lost in its true usage, I was just wondering, gathering from how you've described what pathetic is, a vulnerability, a frailty, an openness, a tenderness, a delicacy, is there a word that exists in the language that could replace the word that's lost?
But you mean this particular word?
Yes, that word.
No, see, I don't. I mean, like, I won't go there because I feel like I wanna rescue the word. I feel like I don't want to replace the word and find the new word. I want the word to work. I want the word. I think the word's got what it takes. It's got path. It's there. It's rooted historically to all the other kinds of feelings. It's just that we're the problem. So I want to. Here I am. I'm an American. I want to win. I want to push pathetic right back. But
were the words that I sort of threw out there part of what pathetic is? Was I accurate in trying to assess the
what
European
were those words?
meaning?
Give me those words again.
Vulnerability,
It's part
frailty,
of it.
tenderness, openness, delicacy.
I mean, also, I feel like what I was trying to do when I was putting the book together was keep changing the meaning of the word, like different pieces of it. Like Ray Armantrout, this is so funny. It's like, she's a friend of mine, and I think a poet who I think is really great. And she's the only person who said, I have to be in it. And I was like, what? And she says, you have to put me in the book. I was like, well, it's kind of, and she was like, Eileen, it's just like, I was like, okay. And the book wasn't closed yet. And so then she did the thing which demonstrated, I didn't put out a call for pathetic poems because I did not want to see what people thought pathetic meant. You know what I mean? I was like, I want it to be what I mean, And so she sent me a bunch of pathetic poems and they were so wrong, and I absolutely didn't, And then I looked through all her poems which are often inspired by science and information. And so there was this one poem that was so great, it was about some kind of little amoeba or something tiny that had a tiny response. And then later there was like a little office anecdote and several people were around a Xerox machine and somebody did something awkward and somebody else twitched, and I thought, that's pathetic. You know what I mean? Because it was so great. And she was thinking something like that too, because there was this little tiny bacteria, small bit of life, and that showing that it had a response, and then the kind of embarrassment and then the twitch. And I thought it is really just literally the fact that we're alive. As long as we're alive, we're going to be pathetic. And we want to be pathetic, That's what was so fun about touring this book, because I felt like I was like a side. It was like you'd go to Seattle, and weirdly, there were 4 people in Seattle in the book. And so they all read and had an amazing gathering. It was, and then we got to Portland. There was nobody in Portland who was in the book. So it was me and somebody I begged from San Francisco and then pulling people from the audience, and there were a few crowd pleaser poems in the book. And so they kept getting read and you kept hearing them differently. So it was like, I felt like it was a real post-pandemic, people wanted some crazy thing to come out for. And I got these amazing audiences because people like pathetic made people feel good, and I think I felt like I had a larger. That is the point, I guess. It was sort of like there's a collectivity to this word as there is to many words. All you need to do is to be obsessed with the word, and you realize, like George Oppen, this guy I mentioned. No, it was Charles Olson said he likes words that still have a little dirt on their roots, and I think that's so beautiful. And I think pathetic has a lot of dirt on its roots. And so I felt like every choice I made was trying to shine a light on a different part of the dirt, And that's collective. We still. Oh yeah, I mean I'm okay, but are we feeling? Is it lengthy or is it? Are we happy? Are we full? There's more people.
Hello. Last question. I'll be very
Feel
quick.
it.
Hi. I only know the word pathetic in a literary context, in the context of pathetic fallacy.
Where are you?
I'm over here. I'm really far away.
Okay, I see. Yeah, I see you. Oh, yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. I could never remember what the pathetic fallacy is.
I mean, it's a beautiful term. It's as far as I know, it's the kind of reflection of the weather in narrative, or
I think it's attributing feelings, though, too, to something, isn't it? And people say that's not right.
I'm not entirely sure.
See,
I can't quite remember, but it seemed to me, it doesn't seem quite so vulnerable, small, and I don't know. The definitions I've heard of pathetic this evening don't necessarily align with the pathetic fallacy, as far as I know. And I wondered whether. Yeah, this is a pathetic question.
This is a great last question. Oh, thank you. Keep going.
I think it's something quite Shakespearean, but I wondered whether, that almost has an element of the sublime to it, I think. The idea that something like the weather, a concept of nature, which kind of reflects human affect in some way. This, I don't know, this is just a kind of literary history of the word pathetic, and where does that come into it?
Oh, see, I just don't do that. That's not. I mean, I feel like a few people who wrote about the book talked about that, but I feel like, I mean, I did a little bit. I looked up the word in several dictionaries and stuff, but I felt like that wasn't what I was. I'm not approaching it in a scholarly. I think I'm approaching it in a sort of poetic and performative way, and also. Whatever the word is that it's about, making a new kind of gathering of some sort, whether it's information or people. But the sublime gets me every time when you say that word, sublime. Did you ever? Again, it's so. The first time I ever went to Hawaii, and I went to Hawaii to do a reading at a college, and people kept going, "Are you going to the Big Island?" And I was like, "What's the Big Island?" And the Big Island is Hawaii. And what is there is the national park, and what is there is a volcano, And so I really did this great, I was traveling, trying to get people to come with me. Nobody would come with me. So I went to the Big Island. I rented a car, and then I was told to I thought I was told to wait till it was dark and then walk out there. But I think they were you were supposed to walk out there before it was dark. So I wound up with inadequate water and a fading flashlight or something, and and I was walking on this lava. I mean, it was like a cartoon, and hisses were coming up, and I was scared, and I was scratching. It was starting to get dark, and I was on bushes, and it was terrible. And then there was water. It was it's Hawaii. It's an island, so. Along the horizon, I see this bug-like thing in the sky, and I was like, oh, my God, and now I'm going to see a UFO. And I was like, I'm praying, not now, And I get closer to that, and I realize it's a boat in the water or something. And I get to the ledge, and there it is. It was just the thing was spilling lava into the ocean. And I was like, oh, my God. And what was so incredible was that as I was alone, I was scared, I was freaked out, I thought I was going to die, and I almost did die on the way back, truly. But in that moment, everything stopped. I thought, this is what sublime means. I'm only in one place in the world. There is nothing else in the world. I'm not trying to tell anybody. I'm not having I have no memories, no fears, no nothing. It was just like lava falling into the ocean. This only happens once, So the word sublime triggered that. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much.